One of the biggest questions that I always get is, do you tie direct or tie to a snap or a split ring when throwing a swim bait? Now, the answer to this question is a lot more nuanced than yes or no for me. It depends on a lot of different variables, and we're gonna break down some of those variables right here and kind of figure out what works best for you and not necessarily what just works best for me and what I use as a setup. So let's tailor the setup to you and not just a yes or no answer across the board. So to start with this whole deep dive, we need to understand the suppleness of line. So, and the different forces that are applied to a swim bait as it comes through the water. So as a swim bait comes through the water, there's several forces acting on it. One of the main ones is water resistance. How the water flows, hits, and provides drag on the bait. So as water flows across a bait, it's pushing against the bait and it's acting against the bait's momentum. So momentum is mass times velocity. So as that bait's moving faster through the water, it's got more momentum and it's got the tendency to shoot further. And then also if the bait is more massive. So if it weighs more, if it's more dense, it's going to carry more momentum as it comes through the water, and it's going to require more force applied to the bait in order to slow it down. So the smaller the bait, the lighter it is, the less it's apt to go as wide because it doesn't have the momentum. There's too many forces applying on it that do not allow it to get as wide as something that is carrying a lot more mass to the bait. So understanding that, the water resistance against it. The next main force applied to the bait is the one provided by the actual line. So if we've got a bait like we've got right here where it's direct tied to the line, it requires that line's providing or has several different forms of drag on it. So there's the drag of being able to push this from side to side as it's coming through the water, but also, especially on a snappy bait where it's getting close to 90 degrees from you, that line has to work around that line tie as it's coming through the water. So you've got to bend the line as it comes through the water. Now, a great way to kind of demonstrate this, so we've got 15 and 25 pound test here, and that's two extremes in the swim bait world. 15, not a lot of people use, and 25 is fairly standard. This is 25, this is 15. But it's fairly standard in the swim bait world. So to kind of understand the strength and the forces that the line will actually apply to the bait and restrict the bait from moving, I've tied a number 4 split ring to the end of, so this is 25 pound test. So I'm gonna pull it out a little bit here, and you're gonna see how much that split ring stands up. So it's requiring a lot of force in order for that line to bend. So that's 25 pound test, and you can see it's still pretty upright when we've got about 1.5 inches of line out. Now, so we're gonna transfer to 15 pound test, and we're gonna pull roughly the same amount of line out, and we'll let it go. You can see just how much extra droopy that line is. So that's the force that's being applied to the line. So it takes more force for 25 pound test to bend as opposed to 15 pound test. So what does this all mean? So as we're working our baits through the water, 25 pound test is going to apply a lot more force on the bait and restrict the movement a lot more than 15 pound test. So, well, that's great, Josh, but I don't want to be throwing a $140 bait on 12 pound test. I get it. That's where we kind of come into the snap. And the snap almost allows a little bit of a cheat code to make your bait act like it's on lighter pound tests than what it is. So we are talking about the force applied to a bait in order to get it to round the corner. I'm trying to get it to focus there. So like we're trying to make that line go from one side to the other, but as you can see, as that line gets shorter, it requires more force in order for it to bend. When it's a lot longer, it doesn't require as much force to get it to bend, but as it gets closer, it requires more force for that line to bend. A snap is the cheat code there, where you can literally apply the same force and it's gonna be able to work its way around that snap very well. So what does that all mean? Why does it matter? What does it all mean? So basically, when you're tying direct, it's going to restrict the action of the bait a little bit, as opposed to a snap. Now, when do you want one versus the other? That's the main question. So If I'm wanting that bait to be more snappy, if it's summertime, I'm trying to get a reaction strike, if I'm trying to work around cover more, I'm more apt to go to a snap than I am direct tie. If I'm fishing more largemouth type waters, they're wanting it a little bit smoother, more lethargic looking bait, I will tie direct. But you've got to kind of also balance that with your pound test. So if I'm throwing 20, so if I'm trying to make it as snappy as possible, like as quick and glitchy as possible, I will throw like 14 to 15 pound test with a snap on it. It's a ton of freedom. That line is cutting through the water super quick, but that line is also able to rotate around the line tie really easily. Now, if I'm fishing earlier spring, where those fish are a lot more lethargic and they want something slow moving, just wide up top, I'm going to be more apt to tie direct to the bait because we're using that line resistance, and I'm more apt to use that 20, 25 pound test because we're utilizing that line resistance on the bait to not make it get so 90 degrees and to allow it to work more, not narrow, but a little bit smoother and not quite get 90 and not quite snap as much, if that makes sense. So that's kind of a breakdown as to when I use a snap or a split ring. I'll throw a split ring right on the front of it, and it's just to allow more freedom in the actual bait when it's working. So if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. I appreciate it. Hopefully that brought some clarity to when I use a snap versus when not, because in my opinion, it's not a yes or no answer. It's very situation based. So snappy, quick, aggressive. You want to have some sort of extra freedom in that nose. If you're trying to go for a little bit more lethargic looking fish, you'll tie direct.